Hi, and thank you for joining us for our technical demo webinar with Mark Lomas, Getting Started with Microsoft Intune. If during the presentation you have any questions, please wait until the Q&A session at the end where you can submit questions using the meeting chat box. Now I'm going to hand over to Mark Lomas.
Hi, thanks for that. My name is Mark Lomas, Cloud Solutions Architect at ProBrand. Today, I'm going to be delivering some tech demos on getting started with Microsoft Intune, as well as a quick look at a few other security areas you might want to look into. The focus of this is very much a getting started demo, so we'll be aiming today's session at those of you who might not have done any device management from the cloud before, or perhaps very little, and want to see how to get going with this. First, by way of introduction, I think we all know some of the reasons why we might be looking at cloud to handle our device management, either in conjunction with or as a replacement for on-premise management solutions. Thanks to the coronavirus crisis, we've had to adapt quickly. We've seen a dramatic increase in home working. For those of you not fully in cloud or with hybrid solutions, you'll have faced the initial hurdle of uplifting your remote access solutions to cope. The onward trend as lockdown eases will likely be that many organizations continue to support home working for many staff. This in turn might lead to more mobile working as some people do choose to work away from the office, but perhaps not necessarily at home all the time. The expansion of home and mobile working can lead to a greater variety of devices that we need to think about in terms of deploying applications, provisioning configuration, and managing security. This, of course, can include non-Windows devices like Macs, iPads, and Android devices. In this regard, we'll see an increased mixture of bring your own device and corporate-owned personally enabled devices. What this ultimately means is we've leapt ahead to a position that might have otherwise taken us another 3 to 5 years to get to, and we're facing some challenges around that. How do we manage devices when they're never connected to the corporate LAN? How do we maintain security of those devices and the data being accessed on them? How do we ensure the productivity tools our employees need are available with ease? It's not just the IT management aspect that we need to think about. We also need to look at the business productivity angle here too. The office was the place we were used to thinking of as a central work hub. It gave us all a place to get together, to get work done. It was where our computers were that we used to access applications and data. We had access to one another for collaboration, meetings, team interaction. Other resources were here like phone systems, printers, etc. Now, however, the office, if one remains as part of your future, will be demoted away from its place of primacy. Instead, the new work hub of the future will be a digital one, a hub where location no longer matters. The rise of the digital workplace is at hand, where that same access to resources, colleagues, and even other resources like phone systems will all be delivered digitally via a cloud solution. This will demand a change in the way we empower our workforce, and as such, the mechanism we use to enable and onboard devices, push out configuration profiles and applications, and deliver security. All of these will have to undergo a significant shift. The opportunity, though, is undeniable, and there's incredible scope here to overhaul productivity and collaboration within our organizations. There can be some nervousness when these sort of changes come in. Nowhere is this more important than when we need to look at security. It's vital to think about protection now as being more than just locking down a network. It's no longer where people are going to be. We need to re-centralize our management approach to be delivered from the cloud so that the extension of management to the resources that are in scope for management is delivered over the air. This is as opposed to attempting to deliver management over a VPN, which can't always be relied upon. We need to refocus our approach to cover management at the device level, identity, data protection, and application protection. This means we need a robust MDM EMM solution to deliver this. Our approach for device security, for example, needs to consider not just Windows machines. We may now have to think about a range of different platforms. We are, as previously mentioned, talking about devices that may rarely, if ever, be connected to the LAN. We can't necessarily rely on VPNs to deliver management resources. It's far more reliable to leverage over-the-air delivery of configuration profiles to machines, which in turn is taking advantage of native cloud management capabilities that today are built into every modern operating system. Thus, we arrive at the native approach for enablement and management. And so, without further ado, I'd like to turn to the main demo for today, where we take a look at Microsoft Intune's device management capabilities. Okay, so we're here in Microsoft Intune. This is the Device Management Center, devicemanagement.microsoft.com. Before we get started and have a look at some of the things that we can do here, I just first want to point out, for anyone that's not done this before, how you actually join a Windows 10 machine to Azure Active Directory rather than a local domain on premise. I'm here in Windows settings. If I go to the accounts section and I go to access work or school, hit the connect button here and it comes up with the ability to sign into my account. But rather than filling this out, what you want to go for is this link here that says join this device to Azure Active Directory. If I was to put my username and password in here and then just hit next, this is going to sign my machine up and register it against Azure Active Directory. It's a bring your own device scenario. So this is fine for a personal machine that someone's using at home and they just want to have access to corporate resources. But if it's a corporate owned machine, you want to go to this link here that says join the device to Azure Active Directory. That's the link to go for, and that's going to actually join the machine into Azure AD. Here in Microsoft Intune, just a couple of things to do when you get started. So when you first gain access to this is you're going to want to head over to the tenant administration section, and what you're going to want to do is head for this connectors and tokens area. And here in the Microsoft Store for Business, you're going to want to set this up. Now, this has already been activated, but it's a very straightforward three-step approach. You just enable it by toggling this on, and you can see that once it's enabled, it's sort of hard enabled and linked to your Store for Business. You then want to open the Store for Business to set it up, and that's going to take you over to the Microsoft Store for Business here and let you set this up. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, there's a couple of good reasons why you might want to do this. The first is that if you remember the Microsoft Windows Store, this is still part of Windows 10 today, and of course there's all sorts of different apps and games and stuff in here. You might want to disable this because you might not want people downloading apps and games like this to their machine. You might not want the Windows Store enabled. But of course there are business apps in here that you might want people to have access to. There's the Microsoft Office apps, there's the whiteboard, there's various other Microsoft applications that are available here. So what you can do is you can kind of create your own store. You can turn off the public store and publish your own store for business. So if I go to my own here that we've set up for ProBrand, you can see that we've populated it with a few apps already. So if I configure a business store, I can say, well, this is what I want people to see. I just want them to see the apps for business, and I don't want them to see the sort of public store. So that's something that you can do rather than just sort of completely disabling the store. You can set up your own business store and then make these apps available in that store. Another reason to do this is that if you want to push these apps to the device, you need to first have enabled them here in the Store for Business and then sync them over to Microsoft Intune. And this is what this last button here is for step 3, is that once you've published the apps in the store, including purchasing them, if you've got any apps that you want to publish out to users and push them to their devices and they require a purchase to be made, well, you can obviously do that at a corporate level, purchase a volume of those applications and then roll them out, deploy them out to the machine. So you set your apps up here over in the Store for Business, and then you come over here, sync them through, and then if I just quickly go over to the apps section and have a look at the Windows apps, you can see a number of applications that we've already added here, and quite a few of them you can see are listed as Microsoft Store for Business apps. These are the apps that have been picked up from the Store for Business and then synchronized over, and I can then assign those out to users and push them out to devices. We'll have a look at that in a little bit. I go back to the home screen here. Let's go into the devices section. One of the things that I want to take a look at as well from a setup perspective is the Windows section and Windows enrollment. This is where you're going to want to come to set up a few of your settings, and just a few things that you might want to look at here. Automatic enrollment is one of the things that you'll want to enable. When you join your machine to Azure Active Directory, if you join a PC to Azure AD, if these settings are enabled correctly, then the machine will automatically enroll into Microsoft Intune. So something I want to point out here is that if you have this improperly set up or you don't have automatic enrollment configured here, then joining the PC to Azure Active Directory, well, that's going to join it to Azure AD, but it's not actually going to enable it into Microsoft Intune. You need to have these settings configured as well in order for the machine to also be populated into Intune. So Azure AD and Intune are very closely integrated, but they're not the same product. So just the act of joining to Azure AD alone isn't enough for it to be populated here into Intune. One of the reasons for that is Microsoft are open for you to use other enterprise mobility management, EMM, mobile device management, MDM, or unified endpoint management, UEM solution. You want to use a different solution than Microsoft Intune, you're absolutely able to do so. So this isn't enabled by default. You're going to want to turn this on. So you can either set the enrollment to be for some users and then choose the groups of which users are going to be automatically enrolled, or for all users, that everybody that joins Azure AD gets automatically enrolled. So that's something to set up here. Just coming back to the enrollment screen, another thing that you might want to look at is Windows Hello for Business. Now, the reason that you want to look at this is that by default, if you join a machine to Azure AD and it gets enrolled into Intune, one of the things that's going to happen when that machine next reboots and logs on is the user is going to be prompted to set up Windows Hello for Business. So that's going to mean using a PIN code, for example, or maybe using biometrics if they have maybe a face recognition camera in their device, or if they have a fingerprint reader, some sort of biometric security is available to them, then it might use that as well. Now, you're going to want to think about this a little bit because it will have an impact for you depending on whether or not you are in a hybrid environment or whether you're pure cloud. If you're pure cloud and you're logging on through Windows Hello for Business, you're absolutely fine to use that feature. If you're on premise, you have a bit of hybrid in your environment and you need to be able to access on-premise resources, well, that's still fine. It's still fine to join Azure AD. But if you then want to connect to on-premise resources, you're going to want to make sure that things are configured in the right way, because once you've logged onto your PC and you're logging on with your Azure AD account, well, you're going to be able to access cloud resources. When you want to access those on-prem resources, if you've logged on using a Windows Hello for Business authentication method, PIN, face recognition, fingerprint, it may not necessarily recognize that for the on-premise resources. It might not be valid, and you might get re-prompted for a password if you connect to, say, an on-premise file share. So there are some reasons why you might want to take a look at that configuration, and there are certain scenarios where you might want to disable and suppress the Windows Hello for Business, at least at the outset, whilst you've still got some on-premise resources, so that people aren't being prompted for additional authentication. Another thing that you want to look at here as well is autopilot. Now, if you're using Windows Autopilot, this is where you're going to come to manage your devices and have a look at the devices that have been added for autopilot. Now, Windows Autopilot is a way to automatically enroll your devices into Azure AD and, well, in this case, Intune, but also the MDM and EMM solution of your choice if you're not using Intune, without using imaging, without having to use any of those kind of legacy techniques for onboarding devices. What this really allows you to do is take a PC, ship it straight to an end user. We've spoken about the fact that people are going to be working from home or mobile a lot, maybe never coming into the office. Your business might now feel free to hire people further afield from where your normal office location might previously have been. So you might need to ship a device, ship a laptop straight to the user wherever they are in the country, or indeed wherever they are in the world, and have that device, be set up and ready to work. Now, imaging would, of course, mean that you're going to have to ship the device to an IT department, a reseller, unbox it, get it set up, get it imaged, get it configured, then put it back in the box, ship it again to wherever the user is. With Autopilot, you can choose to have a device just shipped directly to the user. Vanilla device never set up by anybody before, never been touched before, and yet when the device is unboxed and turned on for the first time by the end user, that device automatically enrolls itself in Intune, in Azure AD, applies all your policies, your applications. Now, how does it work? How does the machine know to do that? Well, it's because the device ID will have been pre-registered in your Autopilot account, in your Intune account. Now, you can do this at the point of order. So when you're ordering your PC from us, from Program, for example, you can say, I need this device to be enrolled in Autopilot. We, in turn, will communicate that to the device manufacturer as part of the order. And the device manufacturer will pre-register the serials, the hardware, unique hardware IDs of those devices in your Intune account, so that when the PC turns on for the first time, as long as it gets an internet connection during the out-of-box experience, it's going to phone home to Microsoft and confirm whether or not it's a consumer device or whether it's an autopilot device. And if it sees that it's an autopilot device, it'll run through the autopilot process and roll your device into management. Now, one thing to point out here is that there is some scope still for the IT department and for a reseller to be involved. There might be scenarios where you're going to be shipping a PC out to a location where the internet connection is okay, but maybe not great, maybe there's insufficient bandwidth, and you don't want the user to have to wait quite a long time for all of the applications to download, for all of the profiles to apply, which might be a bandwidth intensive operation for that first run of the device. So Microsoft have thought about this. They've added what they call the white box, the white glove experience, whereby you can unbox the PC in the IT department, run through the first time setup, get it ready, maybe do a few additional actions that aren't being covered by autopilot, and then ship the device to the end user. So and then the autopilot process is completed by them. So there's a few things that you can do here to make sure that it fits your process. Now, having the vendor add autopilot devices at the point of purchase to your autopilot account is not the only way to get devices in here. You can also import your own devices. There's a PowerShell command that you can run on machines to grab the hardware ID and put them into a CSV file so that you can import them in here. Now, this might be a good idea for existing PCs in your environment, because another of the great things that autopilot does is that if you choose to reset a PC, you reset it back to factory defaults, when it boots back up, it will then fire off that autopilot process again. So for any machines that you need to kind of rebuild, maybe a user has left, they've handed the laptop back, you want to reset it, rebuild it for your organization. Again, no need to re-image it, just refire the autopilot process, and it will not just reset back to factory defaults, it'll do that, but then it will apply all of your policies and your software ready for the next user. So this makes it a very streamlined process for onboarding PCs, but also resetting PCs for the future as well. Now, what I'm going to take a look at here is the devices section and just show you some of the things that you can do in Microsoft Intune with relation to PCs that are enrolled in the environment. So let's just come over to Windows devices, and let's just take a look at some of the devices that are enrolled in here. I'll just pick one of these devices that's in here. You can see the details of the device. You can see some basic information. So we can see, for example, that this is a Microsoft Surface Pro 3 that's been enrolled. If I click see more, we can see this is the Microsoft Corporation. We can see the last check-in time when the device was last online. So we can see a few bits of information about the device. We've also got a variety of different commands available on top. We can retire the device, wipe it. We can force a resync right now. We can restart the device remotely, do a fresh start of the device, autopilot reset. If this is an autopilot unrolled device, which in this case it is, we can reset and refire the autopilot process. We've got the ability to run a quick or full scan of the antivirus, and we can force an update of the Windows Defender security intelligence. We can even reset the BitLocker key. So we've got a variety of things that we can do with this device if it's enrolled in Intune. So this is a bit more than you can do. Straight away, you can see that you get a bit more information about the device and a few more commands and controls that you can apply to the device than in, say, an on-premise Active Directory, just using group policy. Group policy is fairly one way. You can push policies out to devices, but you don't get much feedback back from the device. Sure, you can interrogate the device, but it's a very manual process. When you're using something like this, it's feeding back data automatically all the time, so you get much better insight into what's going on. We've of course got a few more properties that we can look at of the device. We can have a look at the hardware in a bit more detail, so we've got more information that we can get about the device, more information available to us here. We can have a look at the applications that are installed on the device, not just ones that we've pushed out, but applications that have been discovered by Intune. We've got the device compliancy section. I'm going to come back to compliancy in a moment. Device configuration. Are there any policies, configuration profiles that have been pushed down to the device? And if so, what state is it in? We can see that everything's nice and green here, that all of these profiles have applied. So again, when you're configuring policies and profiles to push down to the device, you can see at a glance whether they've applied correctly. We've got app configuration. Do we have any applications that have pushed onto the device? Nothing applied at the moment. Endpoint security, that information is here as well. Recovery keys. So if we need to go in and find the BitLocker recovery keys, they're available here too. So we've got that information available to us. So there's a lot of information that we get, a lot of feedback that we get on the status of the machine so that we know what's going on with the device. So we get a lot more insight. Same deal with iOS, same deal with Android. Now I'm going to go do what I'm going to take a look at now. If I just go back to the devices section, I'm going to show you how easy it is to create a configuration profile in here that you can then apply to your devices. So let's go ahead and create a profile now, and let's choose Windows 10 as our platform. You can also see though that there are other device types that we can select in here: Windows 8.1, Mac, iOS, Android. These are all available. I'm going to do a Windows 10 for now. Now, the type of profile defines the settings packages that are available. There's a bunch of different settings profiles that you can push out. You can see some of the settings that we can apply here: VPN profiles, Wi-Fi profiles. In fact, let me just choose VPN just so that you can see the kind of thing that you can do here. If I just do a test, hit next, base VPN, got all sorts of different VPN settings that you can choose here. A variety of different VPN profiles are supported. Not just the base ones that are built into Windows like L2TP and PPTP, but we also get Citrix, Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Sonic Wall, F5, Pulse Secure. There's a variety in here that are available. Some of these will require you to push the relevant VPN client down to the machine, but many of these are available in the App Store. So you can go over to the Windows Store for Business, find, for example, Sonic Wall Mobile Connect, make sure that that's pushed down to the machine with the appropriate app configuration, and then all you're doing is pushing the VPN configuration. So you got all of these things available to you to be able to push down things like VPN configuration profiles down to the device. So all of these things are available for you to do. Similar story with Wi-Fi. You can push Wi-Fi profiles. So no more do you need to rely on the end user if you've got people who are coming into an office environment to know what the key is, the password for your environment, or set that up. You can push that down yourself, and then they don't need to know the key. Obviously, you could be using radius authentication where they're using their own username and password to log onto Wi-Fi, but there's all sorts of reasons why you might want to push the Wi-Fi configuration down so that there's less work for the end user to do. Now, I'm just going to take a look at a basic configuration profile that we can choose here, which is device restrictions. I'm going to hit next. Again, just give that a name, test, give it a description, test profile. And then we hit next, and we move on to the second step, which is what are the configuration settings that we're looking at. Again, there's all sorts of different things that we can do here. If I just hit into general, for example, there's all sorts of different things that you can configure. Do you want to disable the camera on the device? Do you want to disable OneDrive file sync? Not sure if you'd ever need to do that. USB connection specifies whether the USB connection for the device is enabled. As you can see here, it says USB charging won't be affected. So if someone wants to plug in and charge their phone, but of course it means that people won't be able to plug in and use a USB device. So if you want to block out the ability for people to plug in things like a USB pen drive, you could block that out. There are other ways to provide security around that, things like Windows information protection. But if you want to have a blanket setting, you could choose that. Disable Cortana. There's all sorts of different settings that you can disable here. If you're familiar with group policy, where you've got all this myriad of settings available, you've got plenty of settings available to you here too. There's things that you might want to do that are quite appropriate for a corporate machine, that you might want to disable certain features of Windows. If you've used Windows 10 for a while, you'll know that when you get a consumer PC and you're looking around the start menu, you start to get things like pop-up notifications saying, hey, why don't you download Candy Crush, or other things like that. You can disable these things. You can disable Windows Spotlight completely and completely turn that off. So you can disable consumer features and Windows tips and all of these kind of things, or just disable the whole thing. App suggestions in Inkwell, turn this off. If you want to get rid of all of these app and game recommendations and all that stuff that is fine for a consumer PC, but not the sort of thing that you necessarily want on a corporate machine, you could do that. So let's say that this is what we're configuring this policy to do. We make our settings changes here, and we head over to the next screen. And this is where we're going to choose who this applies to. Is these going to apply to a block of devices where all devices get this, or all users, or are we just going to go to selected groups? And we can then choose the groups to include, and we can just choose our security group that we want to select. So we can search through for particular users in here and then apply it. I'm just going to go all users for now. I'm not actually going to apply this policy, but if I hit next, applicability rules specify how to apply this profile within an assigned group. So there's rules that you can assign profile if OS edition equals, and you can choose the OS editions that you want to apply to. So if you want to filter this to particular operating systems, you've got the ability to do that. Or if the OS version, if these profile configurations need to apply to a particular version of Windows, you can do that. And then when you get to the final review and create screen, It then gives you information as to what settings you've chosen, who it's going to apply to, whether there are any applicability rules, etc. Gives you that final summary before you hit the create button. This is then going to apply a profile to the devices or users that you've chosen. And the next time those devices check in, it's going to apply that profile. Now, obviously, one thing to point out here is that unlike group policy that you might be setting on a domain controller, you're not dependent on that device being connected to a VPN or hooked into your LAN. As long as they get an internet connection at some point, whether that's at home, whether that's at a coffee shop, on a train, it doesn't matter. They're going to check in and they're going to get those profile updates. So you're less reliant on you having to put the connectivity in place yourself, and you're much more likely to get these profile updates rolled out to the devices. Now, another thing that I want to point out here is that all of these profiles, I'm just going to go ahead and create another one. All of these profiles are brand new settings packages that are available in Windows 10. We're moving away from the old group policy stuff that was available in Windows. It's still there in Windows 10, but starting with Windows 8, Microsoft started to build in these new solutions called configuration service providers that are addressed from the cloud. It's built for cloud management via MDM and EMM solutions. So these are all new settings packages. This isn't just a rehash of group policy. So that means that there might be certain settings that you're used to finding in group policy that you're not sure whether they're in here or not. Now, this is evolving constantly with each new build. Each new major update to Windows 10, Microsoft are putting more and more configuration service providers in, giving you more and more scope to configure and allow and apply profiles to Microsoft Windows 10. But if you're looking for a setting that you just can't find it in here, you've Googled around for it, you can't find that there's a CSP for it, well, Microsoft do provide a kind of legacy backwards compatibility option. You can select the administrative templates profile, hit create, and then I can hit test here, go next. And now we've got a kind of group policy style environment for me to apply user and computer configurations. So just like group policy, where you had a bunch of folders and you could just sort of find the setting that you wanted to apply, you've got the ability to do that here in the administrative template section. So prohibit user from manually redirecting profiles. So manually redirecting their profile folders. You've got the ability to configure all of these kind of settings. Let's go back to computer configuration, system, I don't know, let's find anything. Log on, do not display network selection UI, turn off picture password sign on. You've got all these different settings that were part of group policy. You might still want these settings, no problem. You can go back and you can apply these things. So if there's a configuration profile setting that you need for Windows 10 that you can't find in Intune as a CSP, as a modern configuration, no problem. You've got administrative templates as well. Now, the next thing I want to talk about here is these compliance policies. Now, this is a fantastic way of validating that the devices in your environment meet the requirements that you want to apply to allow before you allow them to log on. So if there's certain rules that you want to make sure devices meet, then you can apply those rules. And if a device doesn't meet your requirements, you can say that's not compliant. We're not going to allow it to log on. So compliance policies is a great way to do this. And you can then use that in other policies like conditional access policies to define the rules as to whether or not a device is being allowed to log in. So your compliance policies is allowing you to say, okay, is the device compliant or not? If it's not compliant, in your conditional access policy, you can say, well, if someone's trying to log in from a non-compliant device, not going to allow that to happen. We consider that too high a risk. So let's just take a look at the kind of compliance policy that we can create. Again, we select a platform. Everything from Windows 8 to 10, Mac, iOS, Android, it's all here. Let's go with 10. And let's hit create. Let's just call this test again and hit next. So here are the compliance settings that we can take a look at. Device health, properties, configuration manager, system security, and Defender Advanced Threat Protection. Let's look at device health first of all. Require BitLocker. So straight away we can sort of say, okay, well, we can decide whether a device is compliant or not based on whether BitLocker is enabled on Windows 10. So if we got a device trying to log in, let's say you got someone on a laptop out in the field somewhere, or working from home, or maybe in the future when things open up a little bit more, people deciding, hey, you know what, I'm not going to work from home today. I'm going to go down to the local coffee shop. I fancy a little bit of atmosphere around me while I'm working. Take the laptop down to the coffee shop. They're trying to log in, and BitLocker isn't enabled on their device. They've been given a new machine, or they're trying to take their own machine, and BitLocker's not turned on. They're trying to log in. We're saying, well, hang on a minute. We need to make sure that if you're going to be accessing corporate data on your machine, that you've got encryption turned on your hard drive. So we want to make sure that BitLocker is turned on. And if someone's trying to log in from a machine that it isn't turned on, we're going to flag that as a non-compliant device. So lots of different settings that we can do here require secure boot, require code integrity, device properties. We can specify a minimum operating system version. So again, we can say, okay, well, if an operating system, if Windows 10, if someone's trying to log in on a machine where Windows 10 is too old, it's out of date, it's a few versions too old, and we don't want to allow that, we can specify the minimum operating system version for the device to be considered compliant. So we can do that for desktop machines and for mobile devices. Configuration Manager, require device compliance from Configuration Manager. If you're using System Center Configuration Manager, you can also use that as a way to flag whether or not the device is compliant or not. System security, bunch of different things that we can apply here. Require a password to unlock the device. Encryption of data storage on the device. Device security, firewall, trusted platform module. Is the antivirus enabled? Is anti-spyware enabled? Is there a firewall enabled? You know, we can choose to confirm this. Now, you might be thinking, okay, encryption of data storage, how is that different from BitLocker? Well, obviously you can choose between BitLocker or other encryption solutions. So if you're not planning to use BitLocker on your Windows 10 machines, you're planning to use something else, where you could use this instead. So there's a bunch of different things that we've got available here. Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. If you're using Advanced Threat Protection, we can specify a machine risk score. We're not going to go into that today because we've not got time to go into the full depth of Advanced Threat Protection rules, but you can specify a bunch of different settings for compliance here. Now, if we move on to the next step, we can say, well, what are the devices, what's going to happen to these devices if they don't meet these rules? We've specified that we're going to require these things. What is going to happen to a device that's checking into Intune, checking into Azure AD? If it doesn't meet these rules, what are we going to do to it? You know, mark the device as non-compliant is the first action. Obviously, we're going to mark the device as non-compliant, and we can pop a schedule onto this if we want. We can say that this is going to happen after a certain amount of time. You can send an email to the end user. You've got to select a message template as to what to send to the end user. Remotely lock the device. We've got the ability to do that. Retire the device. Do we want to kick the device out of our network and say, well, we're going to boot this out? So we've got a lot of different things that we can do here. Well, we've got a couple of different things that we can do here, but these have a broad scope as to what's going to happen to the device. Are we just going to notify people? Are we just going to remotely lock the device, or are we going to kick it off the environment so that it has to be re-enrolled before it can get back in? So there's a bunch of different things that we can do, but marking the device as non-compliant in and of itself can have an impact elsewhere in the environment depending on what we're doing. So marking the device as non-compliant just by itself is going to do something for us, potentially, depending on what we've set up elsewhere. Again, we have to assign this to selected groups or all users. This is a user-based thing, who it applies to. So I'm going to go ahead and say all users. And I hit next, and we get a review. Test, Windows 10 and later, compliance policy, requiring BitLocker, firewall, antivirus, and anti-spyware. And what's going to happen if a device doesn't meet these rules is it's going to be marked as non-compliant. Okay, now again, I'm not going to apply this right now, but I just want to highlight the fact that these compliance policies, again, what you're then able to do is when you're looking at your devices in the environment here, this is what defines this compliance column. If your devices meet the rules that you've specified, you're compliant. Now, if you are setting up an environment from scratch and you don't have any compliance policies applied, this is just going to be considered compliant by default. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to say, okay, well, what am I going to apply? What am I thinking about as my rules for my devices? Do I want a minimum operating system version? Do I want to enforce antivirus, anti-spyware, firewall, BitLocker, all of those kind of things? You probably do. You probably want to make sure that these things are working, right? You don't want to have to be logging in and running through a series of checks and audits on a regular basis. The system can do that for you. It's auditing the devices for you and deciding whether the devices are compliant. And right away you'll be able to see here red crosses on any devices that don't meet your rules. Now that may be enough for you. You may say, okay, that's fine. If they're non-compliant, I can at least see that. I can come in here on a periodic basis or get an alert maybe, and I can come in and see the devices that are non-compliant, and I can remediate them. I can troubleshoot them. But there's another level that this can be taken to. We can be saying, okay, well, hang on a minute. If a device is non-compliant, we don't want to allow people to be logging in from those devices and having access to corporate resources. This is where the conditional access rules start to apply. I'm going to head into the conditional access here. Now, there's a few things that we can do for conditional access to prepare our environment. One thing is to potentially set up named locations. So you can see here that I've already set one up called United Kingdom. So you can set up named locations. Now, what this is useful for is if you want to apply conditional access policies that allow people to log in from certain locations, certain countries, certain IP blocks. I can define an IP range instead here and mark that as a trusted location. So you've got an IP range associated with your office, for example, where you're fairly confident that devices on that network are going to be secure, because maybe you've got everything fairly locked down there. Maybe you've got other monitoring solutions going in at your network layer. You've got a lot of things going on, so you can consider that trusted. If I just change that back to countries, so let's say you don't travel outside the United Kingdom to do business, or maybe there are just certain countries in which you do business. If people are trying to log in from other locations, or if login attempts are coming from a country where you don't routinely travel to or do business from, you can prevent that access. So we can define those locations as to the places where you're working from. So if we go back to policies and we can relate that to these named locations, we can relate that to our compliance policies. Again, we specify who this is applying to. Again, we're typically going to apply this to select users and groups, or maybe we want to apply it to specific users and we want to say all guest and external users, or specific users and groups. So let's say I want to apply this to myself. I'll just search for myself in here and just pick myself out of the Active Directory and select that. So we're applying it to select users and groups just to myself, this conditional access rule. Which apps does this apply to? Is it going to apply to specific apps or specific actions that are being taken? We're going to say all cloud apps, for example, on here. Conditions, sign-in risk. We can say, well, this conditional access rule will control access to specific sign-in risk levels. So as we saw previously, things like advanced threat protection might define that. Device platforms. Apply the policy to selected device platforms. We could say that this applies only to people who are logging in from Windows. We can apply that, for example. Locations. We can say control access based on their physical location. Okay, so we've got the ability to do that here. So there's all sorts of different things that we can do around the conditions. So if I go to locations and I say we want to configure that, we want to say selected locations, it's going to bring up my list of locations. I can say United Kingdom, can apply that. So we can lock down the ability to log in from specific countries and say we only want to allow for this country. I'm going to ignore these other preview areas for now. We can grant or lock out access based on these rules here. So we can say grant access, see require device to be marked as compliant. So again, if the device has not been marked as compliant, then this rule won't apply and they won't be granted access. So we've got a variety of different abilities here. We've got the ability to say we can lock it down. We can say we're not going to allow people to log in outside particular countries. We're saying we're not going to allow people to log in if their device doesn't comply with our corporate policy. We've got the ability to do that. And obviously that runs the risk that you're going to find yourself with certain users who can't log in, because they're going to find themselves bumping up against a policy. Maybe their device has fallen outside of compliance for some reason. Maybe the antivirus has stopped working on their device, and the next time they go to log in, they're prevented from doing so. And they're phoning you up and they're saying, why can't I log in? What's the problem here? Well, obviously the problem is the device has now become a risk to the organization. Maybe we don't want data accessible from that device if it's not secure. We don't want people able to download data to that device if it's not secure. So we've got those kind of capabilities available to us. For extremely high risk devices, You've got the ability, obviously, under your compliancy policies to do things like retire the device, which is going to help you remove corporate data from the device that may have been transferred to it. So there's a lot of security scope here. You can be as restrictive or as open as you like, but you've got control. You've got control as to what's happening on those devices, what's going on in the environment, and you've got a lot of ability here to be able to configure security, profiles, policies, access rules. You've got help to enroll your devices in the first place. You've got help to reset them. This is giving you a lot more control than you would have had previously, just using a simple Active Directory and group policy configuration. This is going far beyond that and giving you a lot of capabilities and control that you can administer and that you can monitor and manage over time. Now, through that demo, we've just taken a look at some of the basics of getting started with Microsoft Intune. There's obviously a lot more to do to get a full Intune environment up and running, and there are many more areas that you'll want to address. But I'd like to finish with another much shorter demo, though, just looking at a couple of other key areas, namely those of multi-factor authentication and single sign-on. Multi-factor is, of course, a crucial element of security. We've seen time and again that passwords are the weak link for security, and there have been a recent rise in brute force attacks. Single sign-on is also important, not just to improve end user convenience, but also to reduce the number of logins that end users have got to remember, which in turn should hopefully improve the chances of convincing them to use more secure passwords. So let's take a look at a couple of options for this in Microsoft 365 as to where we can use these capabilities. Now I'm going to start by showing you where you go to enable and manage multi-factor authentication in Office 365. I've logged into my portal here using my admin account, so I've got access to the admin dashboard, which takes me to the admin management environment, the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. To enable multi-factor, you're going to want to go over to the users section and active users, and then you're going to want to click on the multi-factor authentication button, which is going to bring up the multi-factor authentication management screen. Now I've just filtered the list of users here down to just myself. Normally you'd get a full list of all the users if you don't have a search applied. You can see that I've already got multi-factor authentication enabled and in enforce mode. This is enforcing the multi-factor authentication, and you can see it's got my details here, my email address, my business mobile number, and my business smartphone is the one that I use for multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication can provide a number of different options to allow the user to prove who they are when they're signing in. You can have a text message sent to the user's smartphone, and then they just type the code in when they're logging in. For more convenient authentication, though, you can also use the Microsoft Authenticator app. And the Microsoft Authenticator app gives you a few different methods to complete the multi-factor authentication prompt that you get when you're signing in. It can generate the codes. Over here on the left-hand side, you can see that it can generate the codes that you might need to type in rather than receiving a text message. This means that you'll get your code even if your mobile phone doesn't have signal. You'll still be able to just go into the app and get the code even if you're offline on that particular device. In the middle here, you can see an iOS type notification. So rather than actually having to type the code in, you just get a notification pop up and you just hit verify, and that validates your login. You've got the same thing over here on a Google device, on an Android phone. You can just get a notification that pops up to say, is it you signing in, approve or deny? So obviously if you are signing in, you hit approve. If you get one of these notification prompts when you're nowhere near your computer and you're not signing in, you'd want to hit the deny button. So you just need to educate users as to what to do when they're signing in. Obviously, using the Authenticator app with one of these notifications is much more convenient. No typing in of codes, just hit the approve button and you're signed straight in. So that's a very easy and straightforward way to complete multi-factor authentication with 365. And it's not just Office 365 applications that you can turn multi-factor authentication on for. If you have the right service plan, you can also use multi-factor authentication when you're signing into other cloud apps as well by bringing those cloud apps into single sign-on. And that brings me, of course, to my single sign-on section here that I want to look at. So let's hop over now from the Microsoft 365 admin dashboard over to my Azure Active Directory dashboard. Now, all Microsoft Cloud users are typically going to have Azure AD, since it is the underpinning of quite a lot of what you do in your cloud environment. So what we can do here is manage all of our users, groups, identities, devices. There's all sorts of different things that we can do here. But what we're going to focus on today is this section here, enterprise applications. This is where you come to register applications that you are using in your organization and register them into Azure Active Directory. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, one of the primary reasons why you'd want to do this is so that you can enable single sign-on, so that when people are signing into all of the different corporate applications that you might have in the cloud, including, of course, non-Microsoft ones. You can see all of these different applications, most of which are non-Microsoft apps. Then rather than having to remember all sorts of different usernames and passwords, they can just remember the one and just remember a single user login. Much easier for us to then convince them to use a secure password. And of course, when they're signing in, they're going to be signing in via Azure Active Directory, via the Microsoft login method. So we can put multi-factor on that as well. So we've got all of those capabilities to secure that, and we can put conditional access into the mix. So again, we've got further security enhancements. We've got all of these capabilities that we can bring to bear by bringing our applications under one roof. So here, for example, we've got Citrix ShareFile. This is a Citrix cloud file sharing application, and it's very easy to register applications in here. And then you've got a simple 5-step process to configure this up. You assign users and groups. So here I've just got this in for testing purposes. So it's just me that's in here. Go back to the overview, set up single sign-on. You just put in the appropriate configuration. There's some data from the Citrix dashboard that you put in here, some data from this dashboard that you put into Citrix, and that's it. You've set up your SAML single sign-on. And then I can do things like provision user accounts automatically. So if I want to, I can set up some access rules so that when I create user accounts in Azure AD, they're automatically activated over in Citrix. I can enable conditional access if I want to, and I can even enable self-service access so that users can request access to this application if they want to. Of course, these last 3 steps are optional, but it might be very beneficial to enable these last 3 steps so that it's a lot easier and more convenient for users to gain access to the services that they need. Adding applications is just as easy. I just hit new application, and then I can just search for an application that I might be using, say Concur, GoToMeeting, Google Cloud. There's all sorts of different applications that I can add in here. There's a whole range of different applications. 3,501 applications are templated into Azure Active Directory. But if you can't find the cloud application that you need, then you can add it in all sorts of other ways. Add your own app, an application you're developing, add a cloud application that you can't find in the gallery, or you can even add an on-premise app. If you've got on-premise applications that you want to publish through Azure Active Directory, you can use Azure App Proxy to publish them into the cloud as well. Now, once you've done all of this, once you've set these applications up for single sign-on, how does the end user access them? That's really easy. If I just hop over to another browser session that I've got going here, you can use the Azure My Applications portal. Easy to log in, just go to myapplications.microsoft.com. So if you're a cloud user with Microsoft and you've never taken a look at this, you might already have access to this portal. It's not a separate product, it's just part of Azure Active Directory, so you may already have this. If you're an Office 365 user, for example, you might have this. The applications that you add that are assigned to your user account are displayed here. So for example, we've got Citrix ShareFile. I can just click on the application there, and it's going to take me straight over to Citrix ShareFile. And again, it's going to do this without re-prompting me for authentication. I don't need to log in again. I don't need to remember a separate set of credentials. All of the authentication is handled for me by Azure application, and then I'm taken over to the Citrix ShareFile system, and then that's going to load up and provide me the ProBrand Secure File Portal here with access to all of my Citrix ShareFile resources. So this is an example of a cloud application being accessed via Azure AD. Another example is an on-premise application. So for example, let's say you've got an old SharePoint portal running on-premise and you want to publish access to that through the cloud. Just click straight through. This is an on-premise application that I'm accessing via the cloud. So I've not spun up a VPN. I'm going via the Azure App Proxy to get access to my on-premise SharePoint portal here. So it's really easy to do this. And as mentioned, you can apply all of the various rules that you need to make sure that the access to all of your cloud, all of your on-prem resources, all of your 365 resources is locked down and secure. Enable multi-factor, enable conditional access, enable all of those great security capabilities to make the access to your data and your applications as secure and locked down as possible. Now, if you're looking at this and wanting to get started and get up and running with a full device management and cloud management solution for your IT, ProBrand can help in a number of different ways. We can help with the assessment stage. We can look at things like what devices and applications are in use. We can help review your systems so that we can start to figure out what the scope would be for any cloud management solution for these. We can help with a review to determine what your security needs might be. What your compliance requirements might be. We can offer consultancy services here to help out. In the design stage, we can look at helping to decide on what your policies need to be and plan out the configurations that you'll need to use for devices, applications, data, identity security. And again, we can offer consultancy services to help here too. And then, of course, finally, when it comes to the implementation and support, ProBrand engineering services can help deploy your security technologies and migrate machines to cloud management. That brings us to the end of our webinar and demos for today. I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and with that, I'll hand back to the moderator.
Thanks for that, Mark. I hope that the demo has helped you all with getting started with Intune. So it's time for our Q&A. Remember that you can add questions using the chat box and I'll pick them up as we go along. Mark, are you still there?
I certainly am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. So we've got a question here from Anonymous who asks, what is the cost to Intune?
Yes, great question. As you might expect me to say, it does depend on a number of different factors, and there are a myriad of different licenses available from Microsoft in which Microsoft Intune is included. There is a separate subscription available, which is about £4.50 per user or £1.50 per device, depending on what you need to license. But most people will typically find themselves getting hold of Intune through a bundle, such as Microsoft's Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, or Microsoft 365. It's included in the Microsoft 365 Business Premium Suite for small businesses, or it's included in the E3 or E5 plans for enterprise customers. And this is probably going to be the most cost-effective route for licensing Intune. The 365 suites include Microsoft Intune, Azure Active Directory, as well as Microsoft Office 365 and Windows 10 Enterprise. So you may well find yourself needing a combination of these capabilities anyway in order to complete the solution that you're really looking for. Now, ProBrand are a Microsoft Cloud Service Provider, CSP, which means we're able to help both provide the licensing and the billing for your Microsoft Cloud subscriptions as part of a simple monthly invoice. And we have our cloud self-service portal available. And we can also help provide a range of different licensing for solutions that you might have a bunch of different devices or users in the mix, not all of whom necessarily need a full 365 license. So we can help you with right-sizing your license requirements, and we can help make sure that we handle all of that and make sure you're on the most cost-effective subscriptions there. So do have a chat with your ProBrand account manager, and we'll be able to help you out further in that regard.
Thanks, Mark. We've got another question here, and it's, does this work with a Windows Server AD?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a number of customers who want to configure our hybrid solution where they will be continuing to run their on-premise domain controllers as part of their Active Directory deployment. What Microsoft do for this is they provide a tool called Azure AD Connect. Azure AD Connect will allow you to synchronize your on-premise Active Directory with Azure Active Directory up in the cloud. So all of your user objects, groups, computer objects, etc., are all synchronized up into the cloud. Now, what you don't do with Azure Active Directory or Intune is you don't use group policies. What you're doing here is you're creating this sort of new style of configuration settings that gets deployed to machines from the cloud. Now, you can hybrid join a PC, so a PC can both be joined to an on-premise Active Directory and connected up to cloud Azure, in which case it could be receiving policies and configuration settings from both an on-premise domain controller via group policy and via Microsoft Intune. Now, if you do find yourself with a scenario where there's a clash between configuration settings coming from the cloud
and coming from on-premise, one of the questions that then crops up is, well, which one wins? In that scenario, the group policy settings will win unless the PC is not actually finding itself properly connected to the on-premise domain controller, which of course could happen if the PC is operating from home, for example, and it's not actually connected to the Office network, in which case Intune would then take precedence and apply its settings to the machine. But most people will need to have a little bit of a review of which settings they need to apply to their machines and where those settings are going to be coming from. But it's perfectly possible to co-manage devices through both on-premise and cloud, Active Directory, group policy, and Intune. So these hybrid scenarios are absolutely possible, and Microsoft provide the tools to make sure that that hybrid configuration is reliable, stable over time.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to end the Q&A session there. Thanks everyone for your questions and for joining us today. All guests will receive a copy of the presentation with the audio later on. This is the 5th instalment in our webinar series, so do stay tuned for more. And if you're still feeling stuck, do give us a call on 0808 501 6389. That's 0808 501 6389. See you later.